If you're like me, you grew up with a mother who told you to stop watching television and go outside and read a book. But maybe our mothers were wrong. Maybe television is good for you. Man, this video is discriminatory towards orphans. Sorry, Bats. Here in Canada, we spend around 4.5 hours a week reading books, which sounds pretty good until you compare it to the 15 hours plus we spend a week watching television. Both those numbers are from 2007, and I wouldn't be surprised if the television number went up due to the popularization of binge-watching shows on Netflix. So is all that TV really all that bad for you? Well, it's certainly a lot better now than it used to be. If you go back and watch an episode of Dragnet from the original series, you'll notice some stark differences from most modern dramas. All the episodes are completely self-contained, meaning you don't need to know anything about anything to do with the show in order to completely understand what's happening. In fact, they even reintroduce the characters in every single episode.
My partner's Ben Romero. The boss is Thad Brown, chief of detectives. My name's Friday. My partner's Frank Smith. The boss is Captain Lorman. My name's Friday. My partner's Bill Gannon. The boss is Captain Howe. My name's Friday.
My name's Friday.
In each episode, a case is opened, solved, and subsequently closed. The story is only told from the perspective of the detectives, and you aren't expected or required to know any of the backstories or previous plot lines of the various characters. This was primarily due to the fact that network executives were very cautious, because the more information and knowledge required to enjoy a TV show, the more exclusive it was, thus a smaller audience. Now try and jump into an episode of True Detective halfway through the season without knowing who anyone is or what's going on. You'll be completely lost. If you look at Starsky and Hutch, you'll notice a bit of progression from the Dragnet formula. Most episodes offer a comedic B-plot, usually at the start and finish of each episode, and they tell the story from the perspective of both the criminals and the police officers. But still, it was almost completely self-contained. Arguably the first show to have multi-episode plotlines and character subplots and prerequisite knowledge was Hill Street Blues. The average episode of Hill Street has around 10 plotlines spread throughout the episode that often carry over through multiple episodes and seasons, compared to the 1 or 2 plot lines per episode of Dragnet or Starsky and Hutch. If you jump into an episode of Hill Street mid-season, you'll experience a feeling of confusion similar to that of jumping into True Detective mid-season. I mean, aside from the usual confusion of watching True Detective Season 2, but that's a whole other train, rail related thing. TV these days requires you to analyze, not just watch the screen. There are whole YouTube series explaining the different backstories of Game of Thrones characters, dozens of articles pointing out the Easter eggs in the Daredevil Netflix series, and shitty videos of people pointing out the links between The Walking Dead and Breaking Bad. Oh wait, that last one was me. I'm sorry. Lost was the first show, or at least the first show's audience, to really capitalize on this increasing complexity of television narrative. Lost, if you haven't seen it, is a drama about a group of plane crash survivors on an island where the island is the mystery. They built the mystery not only with plot and character, but by throwing little details into the background of scenes, which led to a massive online community creating one of the fastest growing Wikia to date. The internet allowed for a community of people that was already there to come together to help solve the mystery of the show. It was unheard of at the time, but now is rather commonplace. Shows like The West Wing and The Wire aren't only narratively complex, but they don't hold your hand with the content either. In The West Wing, characters use real political jargon spoken a mile a minute to give the semblance of realism. You're not meant to understand what's going on, you're supposed to be in the dark. For example, in the pilot of The West Wing, characters keep referring to POTUS for several minutes until right before the title sequence when they explain that POTUS is the President of the United States.
It's POTUS.
POTUS in a bicycle accident?
POTUS in a bicycle accident.
POTUS?
President of the United States.
This type of television viewing requires viewers to fill in the details rather than being fed them. It's kind of like in video games when you learn the rules as you're going, but that's a whole other video. You may be thinking, what about shows like Law & Order, which more closely resemble the self-containment of Dragnet than the expansiveness of Lost? But the shows that pull the biggest ratings and are the most talked about are the narratively complex and the cognitively demanding. But it's not just dramas. Comedies have gotten a lot more cognitively demanding as well. Early sitcoms like I Love Lucy, All in the Family, and The Brady Bunch were more like Dragnet. For the most part, they were completely self-contained. The jokes relied on characters being witty and never really referenced anything outside their current scene. Friends and Cheers added more complexity, requiring knowledge of characters' biographies for optimal enjoyment. But it was Seinfeld that really got the ball rolling for complex comedic storytelling. For example, if you're an avid Seinfeld watcher, you're probably familiar with Art Vandelay, the fictional character George invented as a reference in a job interview.
Just give me one name.
Let's see, there's Vandelay Industries. I just saw them. I got very close there, very close.
Art Vandelay is then brought up a total of 7 times throughout the series, compounding the joke further for fans. Many times the gap between joke and punchline in Seinfeld could take years, which is very different from the scene containment of jokes from older sitcoms. Arrested Development has a joke that still hasn't paid off, despite its uncertain next season, which is that Tobias is an albino black man. I love that show, but I digress. For television today to be as good for you as reading a book, even the worst form of television has to be as good as a book. Reality television is making you smarter. You heard me. If you look at old game shows, the grandparents of reality television, say The Price is Right, and compare it to new-ish reality game shows, say Survivor, you'll notice some huge differences. When you tune into The Price is Right, you know exactly what you're in for. The rules were clear to everyone who was playing, and the only thing that changed were the contestants and the prizes. Contrast that with the ever-changing rules, relationships, and plot twists of Survivor, and you have a much more complex TV show. One of the reasons people love reality television so much is because, while we know it's not reality, the contestants all have real emotions, and seeing and connecting to those emotions can be very engaging, which leads viewers to easily play along in a way that they don't really for pure fiction. You pick your favorite contestants, judge their choices, you come up with strategies that you would use if you were on the island, and you connect with the emotional side of the characters much more than you do in The Price is Right. Especially since the rules in many reality television shows are constantly changing, meaning people's emotions, relationships, and in some cases even lives are constantly in turmoil, a very high-strung emotional experience, especially when compared to middle-aged white people guessing the prices of furniture.
Here is the actual retail price of the sofa. It is $420. Boo-boo is the winner.
I love you to death for giving me this. You just go enjoy it. You need it.
I'm not saying that Honey Boo Boo or even Lost will be studied next to To Kill a Mockingbird in a couple hundred years, but I don't think that's because they're less worthwhile than books. They're just different. Television is making you smarter because you have to actively remember, track, and analyze a multitude of different plot lines that are much more complex than the TV your mother grew up with. And while TV may not be better for you than books, it's different and certainly not worse. I mean, 50 Shades of Grey is a thing, guys. So next time your mother tells you to stop watching television and start reading a book, tell her, well, maybe you should just read Game of Thrones. That book rocks. Also, she gave birth to you, so don't be a dick. What do you guys think? Is television getting smarter and thus making us smarter? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to learn more about this, I highly suggest reading Everything Bad is Good for You by Steven Johnson, which was very influential in the writing of this episode. I'll put a link to it and other interesting reads in the description. If you haven't already, be sure to click on this face to subscribe, or at least think about it. Or tell her to stop reading 50 Shades of Grey. It's weird.